scenarios where sadly an owner of a company had something terrible happen to them. The business is kind of left a little bit in the lurch.
One that went horribly wrong was halfway through the due diligence. One of the actual seller, director and shareholders actually died midway through. An unwitting business partner that then scuppered the merger, and it was problematic. Lawyers, etc., and quite costly. Their shareholders protection comes in.
Getting some kind of shareholders agreement in place is step one, and having the conversations around who gets what if someone disappears. The reason I have to buy life insurance is because I don't want people having to deal with my wife in the event of me disappearing, which would be terrible for all of them. Myself and Stuart, we are directors of Sona Insurance Solutions. We help companies across the whole gambit when it comes to risk, insurance, just the things to watch out for, advising businesses on important matters, of which this is a very critical one. And I think probably fair to say, Stuart, that both of us have been in scenarios where we've had the sad, I'm trying to change slides, move the slides down, but, oh, there you go. Hey. Scenarios where sadly an owner of a company has had something terrible happen to them, and the business is kind of left a little bit in the lurch. Stuart, do you want to quickly give a bit of overview on that?
Yeah, so a couple that I've come across in the past was a engineering company that specialised in catering equipment, and they were on a very large acquisition trail. And one that went horribly wrong was halfway through the due diligence. One of the actual seller, director and shareholders actually died midway through. And then, unfortunately, there was an unwitting business partner that then scuppered the merger and acquisition. So I think it was about a £6 million acquisition at the time, that my particular client was the acquirer, and there was no end of problems. There was no will in place. The articles of association weren't constructed correctly. It was just an off-the-shelf company that had been grown by two original founders, but it derailed the merger and acquisition. And there was actually another case recently that me and Ollie got involved in as well, which is similar, where there was two founders of a business, and one died very, very similar, didn't have a will, and me and Ollie had to then orchestrate to get rid of another shareholder, which was problematic, and lawyers, etc., and quite costly. So they're two examples of where shareholders protection comes in.
And I think in order to get to the core of protecting against one of these scenarios where the business is left without a major shareholder or any shareholder, you have to take a step back and say, well, what is our agreement between the shareholders? What happens if this happens? And so getting some kind of shareholders agreement in place is step one, and having the conversations around who gets what if someone disappears. The reason I have to buy life insurance is because I don't want people having to deal with my wife in the event of me disappearing, which would be terrible for all of them, as much as I love her. So everyone needs a shareholder agreement, and that shareholder agreement gives a position for everyone in the event of something bad happening. And as you can see from these slides, they're sort of headline information, but it allows you to make the right decisions if you've thought about it beforehand. It defines who owns what. It protects minorities who've got some shareholding, but shouldn't be discounted. Also, that what if a minority shareholder disappears? These things are all important to the stakeholder map that you're handling. And jokingly, Stuart and I were talking about the fact that the one thing you can't insure through this process is if you split up from your wife and she wants half of your money, and what you're going to do then. That's the one uninsurable we can talk about, but we can talk to you about people suddenly dying or getting a critical illness, which changes their perspective and outlook on the business. So, the outcomes with an agreement are so much more manageable. You can carry on with your mission as a business, but without that, everything becomes murky. Let's put it that way, or full of dispute. Um, and as you all know, as founders, the business is so reliant on you. Um, if you want your mission or vision to be seen through without you, you just have to have clarity around these issues. Um, so there are a lot of issues within clauses within the shareholder agreement that you need to address. Um, it's again, if you agree things in advance and get to grips with each of these headlines, um, you will be in a much better position to continue with the business. So, and particularly things like a valuation mechanism, because I know you're all in businesses that are growing. There will be some basis of valuation. There always is some form. It's just having it agreed that you'll know what that means. Um, and as good as insurance might be, your business might hit that exponential growth curve at a certain point, and that's when it goes wrong. So you just need to have that basis nice and clear, and ideally have the insurance maintain the same valuation basis. But we all accept in the real world that if you're going to look at life insurance and critical illness that backs the shareholders agreement, you need to review it a minimum of 3 years to make sure that it is keeping up. Um,
And
anyone
and
got
if
any?
it and
Yeah,
if it's
sorry,
not
Ollie.
if it's not reviewed every 3 years, you could build in significant milestones or markers within the business as well. That would be a sensible, pragmatic. I think businesses, particularly fast-growing businesses, would need to be reviewed. I would suggest to a client every 18 months. That would be the sort of standard what I would stick to. Or if there's a significant event, or you're building to a significant event as well, whether it's a purchase of another business or selling a percentage of equity. So you could factor that in. Sorry, Rob.
No, that's all right. Thanks, Stuart. Anyone else got any thoughts on this? Does anyone actually do anything around shareholder protection at the moment, or have given this any thought? Ed, what have you been up to?
Hi, Rob. Yeah, well, our company's been around for a while, and we have it's not a sophisticated, but it is a shareholders agreement that was set up when the company was established. So, and everybody has to. We have a surprisingly large number of individual shareholders for the small company that we are. But we treat everybody the same, because it is in that way a democracy, shall we say. And whoever put in however much money, it's an important amount of money for them. So we want to make sure we do everything right. So, but Rob, the other thing I wanted to mention is I see you're based in Martlesham. I'm in Sutton, so we should definitely
Oh,
get
are you?
together
Oh, yeah, we
in
should
real
definitely get.
life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent. Oh, no, that'd be great. Excellent.
Okay.
And Dean, you've got your hand up, I think.
Yeah, so we have a very basic kind of shareholders agreement, but we've recently I've taken shares in someone else's company, they've taken shares in my company. We've just brought on a
Uh,
CFO, reviewed the shares, and some of our staff have shares as well. So we're probably on that journey where we really need to take a look at all of this. So this is really interesting to me as we're looking at that at the moment.
yeah, good. Well, that's an excellent point, isn't it? It's the change factor that is the point that you need to keep, reviewing this. Um, Fairly straightforward slide, this one about shareholder protection itself. Um, you're looking to ensure people's lives. It all sounds so morbid, and I'm sorry about that, but that is unfortunately, having seen these scenarios, that's what you need to think about. Um, and and also by putting the protection with the shareholder agreement, it means that everything is clear in terms of what people get out, particularly their estate. Um, and I'm sure you probably all of you have had that meeting with your IFA at some point who says, "Have you done a will?" And you're like, really need to make sure that is sorted in the background as well, because obviously what you don't want to find is your family stuck with a big probate issue for many years. Because I mean, that's an example of a lack of a plan as well. as much as it is having the right shareholder agreement. Uh,
If
and
someone's got a CFO within the firm,
hmm,
Rob, then my suggestion would be, if I was sitting in front of that client, would be make this a CFO job, and then break down from what the shareholders agreement is of any cumbersome
hmm,
paragraphs. And then if you are going to instruct a lawyer, not necessarily initially get the whole shareholder agreement reviewed at a huge cost, but maybe just break it down
hmm,
into sections: what's relevant, what's topical, what could bite you in the next 6 or 12 months. So you could do this over a period.
yeah,
Obviously, you're running the risk if you don't review the whole shareholders, but likewise, the risk is still fairly minimal. Hopefully, most of the shareholders are in good health. So you need to gauge
hmm,
it quite well.
hmm,
But I would perhaps take this in bite-sized chunks. But if you do have a CFO, or sometimes even if you've got a fractional CFO, they could be
hmm,
quite useful in these sort of scenarios, because they're going to have experience of case studies of where it's gone wrong, where they've worked for particular clients or agents. So rather than throwing an awful lot of money at lawyers, I think a lot of CFOs would have quite a deep understanding of what usually works, and at least they can ask questions that are not, as me and Rob found out the other day, at £600-700 an hour, what one particular lawyer wanted to charge us on a particular project. So I'm sure a fractional
hmm.
CFO could be a lot less than those sort of costs.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Yeah, if you can get this delegated and broken down into chunks, like eating any elephant, it's at least it's going to be progressed. Um, and just by way of an example, the things we've been talking about here, um, you've got three equal shareholders. One dies, as long as the policy is in place to fund that, everyone ends up being very happy. This is your ideal scenario. Um, you don't get any ambiguity with the business. Obviously, you've lost someone who's key to the business, but if you can pay them off, you can actually insure people for that little bit extra that allows the company to have some money to replace them as well. So, like any key member of staff, if they're critical of the business, you need to replace that role in an organization. So think about the two aspects here. There is the aspect of um, keeping the family happy, keeping the business within the existing management team, but also how are you going to replace them? What are you going to do next? I mean, it might be a wonderful scenario where the next person was waiting to take that role, but these things all need to be considered and thought through. And like the slide says, you're not having to force a sale. You're not going to have to raise more capital from somewhere else. All the things that are a massive distraction from running your business, everything gets taken care of.
Rob,
Yeah.
what happens if the family member wants to stay in? They just can, and the cash can stay in what happens then?
Yeah. I mean, if there's no, I mean, that might be the agreement that you agree that the partner wants to carry on with the business. If they might already be involved. I like to think my wife's not involved in the business, but the reality is she actually is quite a lot, um, because I talked to her about it. Um, there's nothing wrong with that if it's supporting the business, and it's going to maintain the business direction and achievement, etc., etc. There's no harm in that at all. But yeah,
I
sorry,
think
I'm not being dismissive of these
uh, uh,
people that. Um,
my
sorry,
my
Stuart. Yeah.
my reply to that question would be, all this does is give you choices, which are, in my way of looking at the perspective on life. If I have choices and I can make this informed decisions, particularly if an insurance company is going to fund that choice, then I'm a lot happier person. If you unwittingly end up with a business partner, but things may be a bumpy road, you're not going to know. We all go in business for different reasons, and lots of us enjoy what we actually do, but it's usually the people or the culture is the part that we enjoy. Running the risk of not enjoying of who you end up unwittingly tied to could be a painful exercise. So I think it just gives that choice and that
Mm.
element of freedom, and that you've done the right thing as the business via the expiring ex-business partner. That would be my
Yeah.
viewpoint.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And that capital could still be used for the
Yeah,
business if if you
And
wanted
it could
to.
be used for expansion of the business. I don't think an insurance company would mandate exactly how it was done. They would want to know how it was done, because you can write it into trust, and there's all sorts of weird and wonderful ways that you can actually do it. But long and short of it is, if you could use it to expand the business, then it may suit everyone. But that may not be the case. Someone may just want the cash and run. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. No,
Ruth,
that's
Hiya, yeah, thank you. I think off the back of that question, I was just thinking, like, in terms of when you've got partnerships, obviously, co-founders and stuff, they come together because one has got a certain skill set,
Yeah.
in the partnership and things. And what if, let's say, in a company, for example, one of them is the one who's the expert at coding, and stuff, and you're to lose that person, and then the family member still wants to stay in the business but doesn't come with that skill set. How do you navigate that? Because you need that for the company to keep going on. And so if you need to recruit somebody in, how do you navigate between, you don't have the skill set but you still want to stay in the business? How do we then offset some of that finances to somebody else who's also an expert? They don't necessarily need to come in again as a co-founder, but how do we offset that money to make sure that we can get that full skill set complemented?
It's like most things in insurance, it's just picking the right sum insured. So the right sum insured. So if you got the valuation done, then as Rob said, if you could then top it up. If you look at the average recruitment costs, a decent headhunter could charge you 20,000 easy for a particular skill set. Plus you've got the period of downtime where you're not going to have that individual. So you may even have to go and buy an interim person as well. So that could be all factored into the sum insured. So it's starting with a valuation number and then top it up with other incidentals, which could be justified to an insurance company. As long as it can be justified, it can be done. Obviously, there'll be an additional cost like everything else. But as long as you can justify the whales and welfares for it.
And you've got to assume that the partner or the person who's inheriting the payment or is of value to the business. If in your shareholder agreement you could agree that they're not, and that isn't an option for them, and that might solve bringing in a skill set that the business doesn't necessarily need. Equally, you can write it in a way that allows for that to happen, and away you go. All these things are just to try and avoid any dispute that's going to distract you. You know what I mean? It's kind of these scenarios are obviously many and varied, but all your individual circumstances are going to be different. So you can write all that in advance if it's been kind of considered and thought through.
And Rob and Stuart, I know it's hard to give an exact amount. How much should a founder budget for a policy like this? Is there a general rule of thumb? Or?
Yeah, it's not expensive, Ollie. In my opinion, if you go back to years ago, there was what's called keyman insurance, and it would be something like, if you're a reasonable age, on the young side, I think something like £30 for like 100k years ago, Ollie. If we're just talking a pure budget point of view, life insurance itself is actually quite a cheap product to purchase. So from that point of view, as long as you're medically clean, and there would be threshold limits on here as well, Ollie, where medical interest would go up if you were to get over to a certain limit. So say, for example, if the limit was over £1 million, I'm sure the insurance company would do a deeper delve, and you'd have to sign agreements, no different to if you try to enact a private medical policy where the insurance company is allowed to have access to your doctor's records, for example. So there are some paperwork and some provisions to go through, and there is a small cost usually to go to sit in front of that medical practitioner to get the all clear that you're okay for that limit of cover as well. So so it does take a bit of time, as Rob said. It's just about planning. You've got to take half a day out to go into London to go and sit in front of someone who uses a little mallet to knock on your knee to see if you've got the reactions on all the stereotypical health checks that they do. So it's it's time and a little bit of money. I don't think the money is the bigger concern. The big concern is if you've not got it in place. That's the biggest problem what you've got.
Yeah. Dean's got his hand up.
Yeah, I had somewhat some experience of the old school keyman insurance.
Yeah.
Which was kind of 2013, so about 13 years ago. I had a business, and the lady that ran the operations of the business, we were having the discussion around, there's 3 people in the business that should have keyman insurance. Are we going to put it in place? Are we not? And we decided, we don't need that. 6 months later, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer and unfortunately passed away. And actually the business did have to absorb that cost. It was probably one of the factors, not the main factor, but one of the factors why that business went under, because of that financial cost. So she wasn't a shareholder, but we still had to replace that. So it was costly.
You balance that against the cost of this life insurance. £1 million cover, depending on your health factors, is probably about £150, £200 a month, and that whole thing would have been solved. And
the largest one that I ever dealt with, Rob, I think the request from the client was about $15 million. That's what he wanted, but that was a very large, multi-billion-pound company. But that was the request, and the senior leadership team had a sort of almost like a cap table below that on sums insured. But that was the original request. And I think you came up with one, didn't you, when you were at Towergate, where there was a severe request as well?
Yeah. I mean, I turned up to see a business, an air conditioning company. They had been doing really well, but the owner went on holiday to Cuba and had a heart attack in the sea. And it was a year later I'd gone in to see them. They were still stuck in probate, and the directors were trying to sort of manage a way to kind of continue the business. And it's just a nightmare, really. No one needed that. And of course, they lost some of their best members of staff because you lose the direction, you don't stay on track. And he didn't have any provision at all for the company. So no specific life insurance or shareholder agreement. Just ends up just making life harder. When actually, I think everyone knew what they wanted to happen if that occurred. So, but they just hadn't made the bolder step of just getting on with it. Anyone else got any thoughts? I think we're probably at the end of our little slide run. I might be wrong. So takeaways. Review your articles of association. They link in with the shareholder agreement. The two need to kind of sit hand in hand. That shareholder agreement, how you would value the company, really important to know, understand, put protection in place. And as Stuart said, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, circumstances, ownerships change, and it's best to review the arrangement at those points. But equally, it's just good to stay on top of it and be aware it's in place. One of the sort of classic scenarios is something goes wrong and people forget to think about what insurance they have in place. And, these things can be really important. So I'll send you these slides as well, obviously, and share them. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's a little bit of advert for us there with our contact details.
Well,
I won't label that.
Big thank you, both of you. That's been fabulous. And something, as I say, it's crucial, but often overlooked. With starting a business, particularly founding, when you're in growth stage, it's these things are often forgotten about or overlooked, as I said, and really crucial because as I've been involved in businesses that have had these things and had to rely on these type of things in the past. So, yeah, if anyone wants an introduction to Stuart and Rob, please let me know. If they just want to sort of ask some questions, find out a little bit more. But these sort of things are really important. I'm going to introduce Ed to you two, and I'm also going to introduce Dean. I think, Dean, it'd be worth you talking to Stuart and Rob. I'll do that later this week. All right.
I thought Dean's name was Tenacious, so I'm pleased he had his other name there as well.
It's Tenacious Dean. Tenacious Dean.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Very good. Great band.
Big thank you. You're going to get a lot of love, big ups, and the rest of it on
Appreciate
LinkedIn and other various social media platforms over the next few days. Thank you very much for that. We'll share you a copy, send you a copy of the video, the recording, and if you can just send us the slides so we can put them in our own platform, that'd be really good.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
All
Thanks
right.
so much, Ollie.
Thanks,
Really appreciate it.
Ollie.
Good to see
Thanks,
you all.
everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks all.